So, how many of you? Oh, actually, that's another survey. Familiar with who's not familiar with Visual Studio Code?
I've never used Visual Studio.
Well, Visual Studio Code is different than Visual Studio. Does somebody want to put up another poll about which IDEs you use, if any? So, history. So, I'll start with okay. What is Visual Studio Code? So, you're familiar with Eclipse? It's very okay. Those of you who want to give me feedback, put on your cameras so I can see you looking puzzled, or raise your hand or whatever. So I'll give that first. So Visual Studio Code is about 10, 15 years old. It was written by the guy who did Eclipse, and I guess was informed by Visual Studio, but it's much lighter weight. It's written in JavaScript, built on top of Electron, which and runs in Node. So, just by the way, if you mute your mic so I don't get the other noise. So, there's a lot to there's a lot of filler here, and I want to give just enough background to understand. So JavaScript basically was designed in a week, and looked like Scheme. Then Netscape says we want to steal the thunder of Java, so rename it to JavaScript and make it look like Java. But it's fundamentally different model than Java and C. In it's okay. Another question I should have asked: how many of you know Scheme or Lisp? So it's really more tied to Lisp, but the syntax is familiar. It looks like C. So let me just do a simple. So I'm going to basically. Oops. Well, it's asynchronous. Sometimes if you type ahead, you're in the wrong thing. So I'm going to just write an index.js program. Yes. Okay. Now, the reason we're calling it index.js is that that's the default in my package. So there's going to be, I'm going to be skipping, jumping around a lot. So, no, okay. Since this is not prepared, and I don't know, how much you know, I'm doing a lot of sort of backfilling. So JavaScript was originally browser only. What Node did was wrap the JavaScript runtime from the browser, the JavaScript engine, which is known as V8, and made it into something you could run without the browser. And initially, JavaScript had a lot of operations like strong and things which are browser-based. It's now a first-class language on its own. Term, the good parts, which is a modern language. So Node has a file called package.json, which defines it. So you'll see in here a couple of things. The named version, but the main thing here is what's the main program? Where does it start? Now, the type here is module. Historically, module web server written in JavaScript for Node. So getting back to the sample app, so the people who don't know, now my screen turned white. I have a hack which says if I'm editing a JavaScript file, turn it white. The problem I was trying to solve is a TypeScript is a transpiler. It turns everything, it compiles into JavaScript. The problem is they look essentially identical, and I'm often accidentally editing the JavaScript version rather than the source version, TypeScript. So I added a package to JavaScript, to Visual Studio Code. It's a hack that turns everything white if the current file is JavaScript. Now, there's one problem with explaining all this is there's so much richness here that I can spend, it takes years or days. So if you notice on the left, you see all these add-ins to customize and set my environment. So the challenge when I'm explaining things is very customized. I have my own key bindings and everything, and the tools like that. So going back to index.js, for simplicity, I'll keep the flat. So on the left of the different tools, I'll give you a tour, more of a tour. If this seems confusing and coherent, it's because it is. It's not you, it's me. So, for example, this is source control. There's integration with Git. There's remote. I can debug on a remote system. This is the run debugger where you can see where you are, stack trace. This is the add-ins. And there's a lot, we zoomed out, so there's a lot more. So getting back to here. So the simplest thing, since this is a very quick tutorial, so I can just write a for loop for when someone's been too, oh, no, sorry. When you're coding on the fly, it gets very embarrassing. Okay, and we can just run this. Here. Now, the first thing you notice here is, you notice I just typed 4 and it gave me a for loop complete. Because it decided you must want a for loop. And it just gave me a for loop. And it's right. For the purpose of this demo, this is a fine example of a for loop. Okay, so let's say we want to declare an object. Now, classic JavaScript does not have classes. That's a bad pun. Okay. And its classes are very different than the C classes. So if I type const A equals, actually, let me do this. Yeah. See, it's very good for giving demos. I didn't have to type a text in. It'll give me a version, so I don't care. I'll accept it. So this is an object. Now, I don't want to dwell, but people want to know about TypeScript, so I'm going to do this quickly in JavaScript, and then we'll switch to TypeScript. Okay. So basically, you know, it says name colon. Now, how many of you, if I prepared, I have a better quiz. This is, you know, it looks like JSON. The only difference for JSON is your quote name. You use quotes here. Voila, we have JSON. And that's not a coincidence. Basically, one thing that makes this whole family of language very easy to use is things fold together. So the object notation here is the same object notation saved in a JSON file. And for those who use HTML or CSS, basically this is a CSS syntax too. So there's a lot of reuse of mechanism. Now, if I declare a class, I was going to type person. It knows me better than I do. I can say now new person and get a person object, and the constructor allows me to take parameters. Now this is sugar. Underneath, there's no class. What there is would be a function called person, would take name, comma, age, and you would basically set this. So these are identical in what they do. Now, I don't want to go into all the prototypes and everything, but basically it's a runtime. It'll look at what's in the person definition, a person.prototype, and get its function and everything there. But recently means the last 5 years or 10 years, whatever it was, the sugar syntax was made available. Okay. Now, one thing is I'm very used to TypeScript, so I'm not always sure what feature. You'll notice that there are twiddles here. By the way, and I'm going to step back in a second because I said, so you notice this? I can tell it to implicitly type things, so I don't need to be explicit. But I will be explicit here. Type string, sorry, number. Okay. But you notice I didn't. Now I have to declare name in the class, or I don't, because there's a lot of shorthand. I can say this is a public. By public here, it means anything in the class. Oh, well, okay. Can use this. So now I can say, for example, say name. I can say have a function now which says name age. Now this is a very random tour. Name age, which returns. Oh, by the way, if this is spooky to you, you notice it figured out what it might have been asking. I just filled it in. In this case, I'm disagreeing. Now, one feature is a version of string interpolation. I can use backtick here. And so, and then we go a step back. Now, the important, it does not have static types. All the types are dynamic. And I can tell it that just declare this any, and it's not going to bother enforcing any type on me, or I declare an object or unknown. So I think of a JavaScript as type annotation. It's basically an assistant that helps me write code. It catches the errors. I can refactor, so I get the benefits of types, but I don't get the rigidity of types. I can always escape the typing mechanism when it gets in my way and annoys me. And in the in a TS config file, you know, it's a lot of options here. Let me, go to home here. Okay. I can tell it, there are too many options in a sense. Do I need to force declare types? Do I have that? Does it? One thing I hate is the war on nulls. Nulls are wonderful once you escape C and C++, but people have had a childhood trauma and are afraid of nulls, so you can tell it to slap you down if you use nulls and make it explicit. So this just gives you a little sense of the amount of the many options you can have. You get now. It's a transpiler, so you can write code in modern JavaScript or TypeScript that transpiles to run in old browsers. Now, it turns out that browsers are being updated so much for bugs that probably there aren't many useful people running old browsers. If somebody's writing IE4, they're already hosed. Doesn't matter. Okay, so let me jump back now. How many of you want to try this? Do this at home. So since this is a Linux users group, I don't know whether I should give you much time or just copy to this off the screen. But this is how to install. So you do the normal app thing. You install Node.js, which installs an old version. Now you install. Now package managers are common these days. So npm is Node's package manager. So after you install Node, you can find the npm version, and then there's a command in npm to is kept in source. No magically hidden files or anything. So the source tree is copied into Node modules globally as opposed to locally. And here there are a couple of things. In this case, there's a program called N. Single letter. Ugly, but it does. And then you could tell N to update Node.js to the latest version. And then I installed TypeScript, same way. And then I installed Visual Studio Code. So for those interested, you can take a pic, I don't know, screenshot, whatever. If you want to get this, and if you want to play with this at home while I do this, that's fine. Now, one thing is, no surprise, Visual Studio Code is very integrated with Git, owned by Microsoft. Microsoft. The good thing about the news here at Microsoft is that they want to win over developers, so they're providing all this for free, all available. Now I pay for subscription to GitHub to get private repositories, and I pay a little more for Copilot. Now, you saw I gave extensions. There's a command line method to install extensions. So if you want to play with Copilot, you can do that. There's also AWS Toolkit. There are many others. AWS has their own Whisper thing like Copilot. Okay. You can then initialize a project by making directory. You do npm init to initialize a package.js, which is initialized to the common JS, the old module format, so you can manually edit if you want to use modern modules. Well, that's where I got my, okay. Now, TSC init in its TypeScript and creates a tsconfig file. Now, you notice here, if you want modules, you can init the tsconfig file this way. So first, I'd like people to ask questions. Any questions before I go on? So let me go switch to the chat. Oh, there are things in the chat. I was looking at the poll. Could you hear me? Okay, just to answer the questions. I used to use Atom. Yes, Visual Studio, there's some overlap, but it's sort of taken over. Make a scheme look like C, calling it JavaScript. I don't know. I actually like, there are only so many parentheses in the world, and I think I used them up long ago in Lisp. So I don't mind the syntax change. The major thing that JavaScript does not have is reversibility. I'd like it if you could get a scheme view of the parse tree and reverse it, and that might actually get implemented. So you can now get the source code, a source-like view of a function object, but you have to reparse it. Yes. Okay, null. There's null in JavaScript is perfectly safe. Yeah, your program might do it, but it's no different than having a string value when you expected a number, things like that. So there's no safety loss to null. It just confuses children. But there are new syntaxes which make null even better to use. I'll get to that. To park the payload. Yeah, well, the pseudo thing, that's a whole topic. Okay. In any case, now that you've all installed it, I know you haven't. Let's try a sample program. So let's take this here, delete everything, type Control-I. Programming has changed a lot from the old days. Okay, accept it. Now, wasn't that easy? So let me explain what's going on. So a lot of this is, in a sense, mostly this is same as JavaScript. I'm going to get to the other TypeScript specific stuff later. So it brings in a package. Now, what I need, what I already did, but I'm going to do it again just to show you, is I go to the terminal program. I type npm install express. Already installed, so it's a null operation. Okay. What I also do now is I now npm install this brings in express.t.ts, which is a type declaration file generated for Express. Since Express is written in old JavaScript, it needs a type declarations. When you compile or transpile TypeScript, it can generate a .d.ts file, which can be loaded so you can put the JavaScript in the GitHub repository for use, and rather than loading the TypeScript files. So most packages now have a types declaration. And these days, I can use Copilot. Now, how many of you use Copilot? I can just tell Copilot to generate the type declaration. Now, the other big change is that TypeScript gives you the ability to do IntelliSense, which means completion. Not so. If I type app here, app.use, it'll show me what's possible, and even generate a suggested. Well, two things going on. App.use IntelliSense, which is showing me what the options are. Copilot, you can't tell the difference. Basically, generated an ad in here. Now, what this means is if I like to call it directory client. So I can now generate a new folder, client, and then in client, I can generate a new file called index.html. Well, okay. Now, one thing I'm going to do separately, I'm going to let you use you. If does anybody want me to open up port 3000? Maybe it's open. You can go to http rmf.vc. So rmf39 rmf.vc.r. Oh, now my mind is going because I do this so often. Oh yeah, rmf39.aaz.lt:3000 to see if you can get to the server when I start running it.
Can you
Oh,
paste that into the chat window?
what?
Can you paste that into the chat?
Okay, I'll do that. I just want to figure out. So let me fix this. Ignore this. Okay, so it's annoyed about my HTML. Okay, so before I do that, I want to make sure the port is open. Give me a second. I'm going to my Unify server. I think I am. It keeps crashing on me, which is annoying. I'm just making sure. Okay, advanced. Oh, one thing I need to. In order to make the change, I need to start the Unify server and just make sure I got port 3000. But I'm going to put that in the chat for now. Okay, that might not work right away, which is what I need to work on. Oh, okay, I started it. What I want to do is make sure that I've got that port open as forwarded. Okay, you should be able to go to port 3000 now. Where is it? There it is. Tell me if it works for you. Okay. Anybody seeing this?
No, it's I don't get anything. Just
When you-
sitting there spinning.
Oh, refresh it. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my phone, shut the internet connection down my phone. Not cooperating. Okay, turned off Wi-Fi. I want to see how it works here. Ah. Okay, the stupid phone is smarter than me. Okay, there it is. Hmm. See, it's not working for you? Okay. Well, no sense of spending too much time on it. Okay, getting back, because there's a lot to cover here. I mean, there's so much here that I'm just jumping around. So let's go back to this index 1, which I had. I'm going to repurpose that. So how do types work in TypeScript? Since, if you know JavaScript, you already know a lot of what I've said. So one thing it has is interface. Name of string, age, colon number. Oh, no. Let's make it a class. Oh. Okay. So I create a person interface. That's like a class, but you can't instantiate it. So it's used to sort of define a person, but it can also define. Okay, this is an interesting example here. So you can also declare type explicitly. Now I'm just giving you a sense that it's a whole type algebra in a sense, way of computing. So I can create a type called person keys that shows the keys in the object. Now this is where mechanisms fold together. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of the amount of mechanism. I'm not trying to explain it totally. So what this is you basically create all sorts of tools. So now I can create other types which say, like if you say select or switch a key of a person, what's smarter than me? So it knows that the choice could be names. I never declared say. Let key equals person. Name. Okay. Person lowercase is null of person. As doing this live is always a pain. I hate this. It decided that it's going to fight a war on null. Strict null checks. The default is here, and you notice it's not complaining anymore about the null. And I don't have to do this because I'm going to switch on a person. And on the name. Here's the problem with doing things live here. The sense of giving is that you can derive. I can, for example, say this type consists of all the keys here except, and these are not things I use. These are tools when people are building fancy libraries, they use these tools. So they're going to say, for example, use the keys of and create a type which has a parameter. This is keys except for this element. So these are fancy syntax things I'm not going to get into here. But one place it is useful is, I've got an example. Let me see if I'm going to go to the editor here and pick this example up. Okay. I'm just going to put this in as, I'm just using Visual Studio Code as a display program. I guess syntax errors here. So let me explain what I'm doing here. These are options for a spawn, which runs a sub-process. Now, what you can do in TypeScript is say that there's a return type, spawn return type, that extends spawn options only. The options have standard out set to be true. Then I'm declaring the return type to be string. Otherwise, the return type is standard out and standard error. So what happens here is that there are two definitions of spawner. One, okay, I don't know how many are per prompt, but what you can do is you can have multiple declarations of a function type. You can declare different things, and what you can do is have the syntax say, if the call string returns this, then find the matching patterns. This is different than a language like C#, where you can declare a function, multi-layer function with arguments, and then this is very common. At runtime, you test, am I called with an object? Am I called with a function? Now, that's very useful. The problem is, how do you get a compile time? Well, it's not really compile time. How do you get an edit time check, which is what we're really doing? This is not compile, this is edit time check. And what you can give it is different patterns, saying, if you see this pattern, then it returns this. So that's not something that happens at compile time, but at runtime, you look at the types and you decide what to do. Now, the amazing thing is how well this works. Because in a language like C, you've got, actually, let me, by the way, before I forget, I wrote out some of this a while back. Oh, it's not about this. To give you a sense of the ecosystem around JavaScript. Runtime type checking turns out to work rather well compared with static. The reason we have static objects and pre-allocation is in the 1960s, you couldn't fit the compiler and the runtime in the machine at the same time, so you had to pre-compile everything out and bind it together. In TypeScript, you've got all the tools available, or JavaScript, you've got all the tools available at runtime. So the V8 engine compiles on the fly and can use techniques like memorization, where if the arguments look this way, I don't need to recompute it, I know what it is. But you can also have one other advantage, that when you're writing functions, you have to deal with all the edge cases. What if the input is negative? What if this happens? And throughout the code, you have the complexity of dealing with all the edge cases. What V8 is able to do is say, let's compile for the streamlined case code, and if an edge case shows up, we'll deal with it, but we don't have to anticipate all the edge cases. And then we can generate compiled code for those edge cases. So that allows efficiency, even if we're looking at the arguments at runtime to see what they are. So if you look at a library like Express, which I showed you here, you'll notice here it takes a string. Here use takes a function, which actually returns an object and says, basically, this equivalent to writing code for Sometimes it gets ahead of me. That's the problem. Okay. So what this code does now is if you call this with a client, it basically reads, now dir name is the wrong syntax because that comes from the old thing. We'll go into that. Or actually I'll show you how to fix dir. I'll fix dir name right here. Now, it made a mistake by filling in. By the way, I know this is very incoherent, but that's the fun of this. So I'm going to import path from path, it knows that. Import file URL path from URL. Yes, I did. Now it's happy. Okay, and we can correct that here. Okay, and get rid of this. Okay, what this says now, this is the module, I get the dir name, so I take that directory name and combine it with that syntax, and send file will return that file. Now, of course, I would never say that because I would say path of path.join. Now, the nice thing about this is almost all the code will run identically on Windows and Unix. So if I want to now, well, I won't do it because only so many, you're not sharing enough windows. I can actually run this on a Linux machine and it'll do the same thing. Or I can run it in WSL, which is the Linux environment under Windows. And I've got various Linux installed, Ubuntu in particular, and it'll run the same. So it's all the same. What this does now, if you look here, you'll see this is where it's installed Express. This is where it's installed the types definition for Express. You notice it also is installing type definition for the serve static. Now, another interesting thing I'm not going to get into is the Express. I have a, let me put my my next column. I'll give a short name for it. It's got a longer name. That explains how I'm using Express to, because these, I can basically take a message that comes in, annotate it by adding function, mix in information about the session, pre-parsed, and you can tell TypeScript that the request object here, which you see I declared here, has additional values, so it mixes in a lot of different definitions. Again, I could. There's so many diversions, but this is there's a lot of leverage here, so you can write code, refactor it, and it's a system. I would not be able to survive without TypeScript because I'm sloppy. TypeScript not only keeps me honest, it means if I change a declaration, I can then track down the consequence of that change. So I've gone all over the place here. And by the way, Visual Studio Code is a topic in its own right, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of this. So if I now go to the web page and I click the button that says, I'm just trying. So can you just people try this HTTP again to see if it works? By the way, one thing I have, and this is completely off topic, I wrote my own library with thanks to ChatGPT for getting me the information, which dynamically takes the name, decides which certificates and whether it's HTTPS or HTTP on the fly. But I'm not going to bother hooking that in here. But because of NPM, I can take any piece of code I write and make it a library for another program. I know I've been all over the place, so I want to get a sense what I'm trying to whet your appetite. I'm not going to teach you enough. There's a great book by Carl Simpson on how this works. That should be a first reading for JavaScript because this and prototype types are very different than static types. So in JavaScript, basically create an object by making a copy of another object. Somebody's typing. Is that a question coming in? I hear a keyboard. Anybody have the mic on?
Yep.
Okay. If you have any questions, speak up also.
I was just putting in the comments that I can't even ping the address. Never mind.
Wait, rmf39.aaz.lt does not ping?
Nope. Let me try a trace route.
I know. Okay. I'm going to go to an external machine. I've got one of my
Oh, you're talking about the web address, not for pinging?
HTTP. Yeah, you want HTTP://. But if you clicked on what I gave you, it should work.
If I can't ping it, I shouldn't be able to get to port 80 either.
No, ping. Live systems turn off pinging.
Oh.
But you're right. No, it's not responding here either. So I don't know why. Well, don't worry about it. That was just to be cute. I'll have to
I have it in my browser.
What? Oh, yeah, I do get.
Let me try port 3000.
I hear kids.
Yeah, I can connect to port 880, but not port 3000.
Hey, Jabber, do you have grandchildren?
Oh, nope. I see. No, it's my mistake. I've got grandchildren, yes. Friday's my grandparent. It was my fault. I typed in the wrong forwarding address. Now it should work. The grandkids sound much older than mine. Okay, does it work now?
I'm still not connecting.
To 172. Wait, let me see if I made another typo. No, 172.20.3.39:3000. Oh, it might be cached. I don't know. No, it shouldn't be.
When I try tunneling to port 3000 on the 204 address, it's still not connecting. And it is still connected to port 80.
Yeah, something's still wrong. Oh, we spend, I could try to debug it, but
is it possible?
What?
Is it possible that your firewall is allowing port 80 in, but not allowing port 3000?
No, I'm looking. Well, first, anything's possible, but I'm looking at okay, port 80. They're both forwarding the same way. They look the same. I could make this available as a sub address of port 80 if you really want, but again, we don't have to worry too much about it. I have no idea why it's failing, but we can spend, decide how much time I want to spend debugging, but it's filling on my phone too. Oh, no, it works on my phone now. Try refreshing again. It just worked, and I turned off the browser. I'm coming in from the outside of my phone, and it is working.
Oh yeah, now I get the Hello World web page.
And you can hit the test button and it returns the time.
Yeah, 80103.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks right.
Okay, so it is working, and I can put some message in when you connect and all that. But you get the idea. So
It works great.
Well,
It's now working good.
good. So I could actually, for example, what I could put in here now, and then you can try it again. App.use. I like app.use because it's more general. Unfortunately, I call my grandkids vectors now. They make us sick, but they're fun to have. Okay, so now if I restart it and you connect, so let me try connecting here. You can try connecting. You notice there's a message? So now I'm tracing what you did and then passing on to the next handler.
You know, I'm still just saying Hello World and the time button.
Yeah, but if you look at the browser screen, at the share screen, you'll see that you'll see a connection being logged. I'm going to restart it again. Oh, it's my host name, but I want to do rq dot. Oh, will this work? Okay, so now try connecting. You see, it's showing where you're coming from. So I just added that. I didn't realize it just gives you the IP address now easily. I used to have to do a more complicated call for that. But you're getting a sense of how quickly these tools work. And this is what I like. The mechanism here is well tuned for these tasks, especially with asynchronous. So I can add an asynchronous call, and since it's single threaded asynchronous, it's a lot simpler than using C# or other languages, because they have too many degrees of freedom, which I often want. But for most of the tasks I do, it's much easier just to work with Node and not worry about complex locking schemes and things like that. Now, the problem is you want the kids to learn about all these techniques, but I'm appalled when I look at YouTube programming things, and the amount of ignorance and stupidity there is shameful. But that's our new society. Knowledge, I know what to rant about that. The kids these days, they don't know. Sorry. So I think it's best, why don't you ask questions for me so I know what you're interested in. The real thing is you should be trying this at home yourself. And I have to admit, the laziness of having chat just write the programs. Now, by the way, one thing I did a while back was make sure this works. Okay. If you look at the Blinky thing, I wrote that back in 2016. That's my first foray into using TypeScript. And what's interesting there is you saw the Power of Express. in that example, I'm not even using HTTP server. I'm going right to sockets and implementing it from scratch. So you can see, how low level it gets. And that was designed to run on a Pi and control lights. And strangely enough, it ran under Windows originally. Windows for IoT, running on a Pi. Windows for IoT wasn't a success, but it really showed how low to the metal you can get. And if you like the JavaScript world stuff, look at Moddable. They sell full JavaScript for the ESP32 in those machines. So, other questions, comments?
Why was it so loud?
Bob, this has been great, kind of a good starter intro to TypeScript, and hopefully I'll carry on and build on that a little bit.
Okay. Glad to confuse people.
And if anybody has questions, either as we transition, feel free to jump in, or if you have questions for Bob, either in the chat or just over the air.
I just want to say thanks, Bob.
Okay. Glad to confuse.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was great. And appreciate you taking the time, Bob. And what I'll do is I'll pop up a screen here that will give an idea of what I'm going to talk about.
Okay. And I'm going to go back to resetting so I can get enough acreage on the screen. I can understand why the font seems small, because I've got a 4K screen here.
Mm-hmm.
At least I'm not using my 5K screen. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing, if I can figure out how. Yeah, it disappeared.
There you go.
And I'm going to mute myself. And
Okay, thanks. I've brought up, I'm going to take a little different approach on this, just to go through a document kind of in narrative form. And if there's any interest, I could convert it into slides. But can people see the page that's up there? It just says BLU at the top, and it's got the BLU logo.
Looks good to me.
Yep.
Great. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of, the idea here is to, the TypeScript component of this was just the realization that it's a ubiquitous language. And Bob, some years back, was a developer-focused platform, I guess. And so I didn't jump on the TypeScript bandwagon probably early enough. And the whole JavaScript experience, to me, people can feel free to comment, early on was, kind of best summed up by the book that was kind of a Kernighan-styled bestseller of JavaScript, the good parts, right? So there were a lot of parts, especially in the early days of JavaScript, where you could just fall into black holes and really not, reappear anytime soon. TypeScript certainly goes a long way towards helping with that. Bob is mentioning Crockford, is the Douglas Crockford, I guess, when he was at Yahoo, maybe had done JavaScript, the good parts. But it's TypeScript combined with the amazing tooling of Visual Studio, and I too had used the Eclipse and Atom and these other precursors to it. But the Visual Studio ecosystem is just amazing at this point. So one of the, and earlier, but sort of at the pre-meeting, folks were talking about, moving off of their local-based platform to kind of more of a virtual server-based thing. So I just jumped on this Linode thing. They've got great deals, promotions, introductory, $100, try it out for 60-day kind of things. Easy to get up and running on. with a URL, and then there's something Ruli group, and there's njump gateway, and there's a file server. So those are four kind of server processes that are currently running on that IP address. And underneath the four headliners are all Go programs, but then the Postgres component is running there, and the other programs are basically relying on it. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works out. So really the central aspect of this is this thing called Noster. I've talked about it a little bit before. There's been a remarkable evolutionary development of it. It just in particularly the past 3 months, certainly over the last 6 months, it's a relatively newer innovation. It's protocol based in different ways. In the simplest early implementation, it was essentially just a messaging protocol where people could, kind of in chat-like fashion, post messages to relays, which are nothing but servers running variations of a theme on software that is all open source. There's some great implementations in Go, in Rust, in C, C++, and so forth. So the balance of this really is going to talk about Noster, and where it ties into the TypeScript story is the kind of the quest for the ideal client, right? And so it's a relay-based, server-based progressively. So in the simplest terms, this is probably a little bit hard to read, but essentially those things next to the red redactions there, those are the fundamental data elements of the protocol. And it's pretty amazing how much they've spun out along the left-hand side, which is pretty hard to read. But those are just markdown documents of individual specification proposals, right? And so they use this acronym NIP, and it's kind of a takeoff on the Bitcoin BIP, innovation possibilities and implementation possibilities and basically ideas. But the first one is the one, NIP 01, is the one that much of the Noster development that has spawned a fairly, decent, not blue sky, maybe scale, certainly not Twitter scale, but that's the application space that this is playing in right now. This is a look at Fiat Jeff's GitHub page, and Bill is commenting about the appropriateness or inappropriateness of the naming of it, but he can feel free to jump in if he wants. I was pretty thrilled and happy to see the folks put this together. Essentially, it's a web server, and what you can do is you can enter in, and if time and the live coding gods are with us, I'll show you how this works in a bit. But basically, you can enter in the identifier for one of these event records, which is in its own special kind of Noster format, but it will pop up in a traditional web server in ways that make it accessible and readable. So it's kind of a nice way of making the Noster technology more broadly accessible. The next two, or the next one, dot files, is just kind of his own file notations and stuff. Ruli is a really new one, and he actually kindly made some recent changes, fixed it, and made it more accessible to a point where it's actually demonstrable tonight. But it's still kind of in the early stages. But basically, it's using the Noster protocol and the foundational code that's been developed to essentially deploy a group communications system. So it's got concepts around membership and permissions and certain functionality that's revocation of permissions, and call technologies that's really in that MIP 01. One of the big parts of the rapid, I would say, development of the ecosystem in the last 3 to 6 months, they've developed kind of foundational tooling. So, for instance, underneath this Ruly group chat is this other thing, which is 2 down. Well, actually, the next 2 down we'll skip over the chat and come back to that. But the event store and the Katru. So the event store is essentially a database abstraction layer for the backend storage of these notices, events is what they're called. And Katru is a generalization of the required processing for an implementation of the Nostr protocol that can then talk out these different and store data, persist data through these different backend databases. So when it first started out, really, Postgres was the thing that they implemented the first versions in. This was really only 6-9 months ago. But now there are abstraction layers for MySQL, Postgres as well, SQLite, LMDB as a backend store, and others. And so it's kind of like choose your flavor of database, and they're going a long way towards making this a platform that rides on top of it. And then the NDK is essentially a toolkit for it's helpful for debugging, for poking around in the underlying data that makes up Nostr environments. Just a pilot, or but the Chat GPT is in I've got a couple samples here. Yeah, Copilot and Chat GPT. So have people used Chat GPT for anything that's code related? I don't know, show of hands if you've got buttons there that you could do it. But it really is extremely useful, and it's certainly not bulletproof, and certainly not all the code that it explains or that it demonstrates operates, but more often than not, in my experience, it has for little well-constrained snippets of code, and the kind of things where it might take time to dig into to better understand how something is supposed to work. Here are just different examples of, and it's varied across TypeScript or JavaScript or Go, or a wide variety of sort of Q&A types of things, right? And so there was one, it kind of knows nothing about Nostr, and somewhere I noticed in one of the footnotes that if what you're asking about was before sometime in 22, sorry, this build of Chat GPT was current as of that date. So I don't know what their model is for, kind of like the Google index of what's the frequency with which they're crawling the space, but it certainly is not up to date on anything that I found useful for the Nostr stuff. Indeed, it may be. Bob is now saying as of April 2023. I had seen something, I thought it was November 22 that was the last build. But at any rate, as I ventured down this path, really with no prior knowledge or working experience with TypeScript and plenty of other questions to boot, ChatGPT proved to be a pretty useful tool. So here's some, this adventure of the past couple of weeks since Jerry and John wondered if there was something to talk about here. I'd done some database stuff in the past, but not that much SQL stuff. And anyways, I kind of migrated through the different database choices to SQLite, and and looked at MySQL for a while, but it didn't really do the kinds of things that I needed, and ended up back at Postgres, which is where I started probably 6 months ago, thinking that, boy, there had to be a better way, because it's a little bit of a heavier lift, and to get things up and running. Anyways, the next page at the bottom, or this page at the bottom, that one thing that you find pretty quickly, juggling these different systems, if you're trying to string together a system that works, is passwords. You've got your Ubuntu Linuxy passwords, you've got your Postgres passwords, you've got your SSH passwords, you've got key pairs, and then and then on top of it, the way Nostr works is there are public-private key pairs and that are used to indicate uniquely, and there may be some contests here on the wire about this, but basically every user can create however many private public key pairs they want, and the public key is generally used as the public identifier, and the private key is used for signing messages and other kinds of things that require some form of verification or validation. Are there any questions at this point on that? There's no discussion of cryptocurrency in here, Bill, so I won't provoke you with that. Although I will say, as a side note, early on, so at some point, Jack Dorsey, showed up, and it was around the time that Twitter was being acquired, I would guess. And certainly it was around the time that there were a lot of layoffs happening, and people were starting to ask questions about what the different technology paths are moving forward. And Nostr, which had already sort of been traveling down this path, drew Jack's attention. People out there in the development community suggested that it would be a good thing for him to look at. And, he had been, if not the main mover behind this Blue Sky effort before he left Twitter. He certainly has been attached to it in conversations I've seen. So anyways, he jumped on board, provided some funding and visibility and encouragement. And some of the Fiat Jaff, who was essentially the recipient of a grant, my understanding is split the grant in half with another developer, and the developer focused heavily on an iOS application, Damus, right? And so did remarkable work there, and eventually it came to be banned in China, and it bumped into some of Apple's rules for restrictions on hosting, deploying, in part because they embedded a link, and this is a cryptocurrency aside, into the application that would allow people to do these so-called zaps, right? So an in-app way of transferring cryptocurrency is what, and I'll just leave it at that. That ran afoul, I believe, of what Apple allowed in their terms of their developer terms of use. I'm not quite sure how all that stuff works. Okay, this picture, which I copied from that website, the source below, it just shows roughly what the block diagrams look at like. So the lavender, the green, and the blue, those are the relays. They're nothing other than servers, software. The beauty of this is software. It's open source. You can go, you can read it, you can understand it. And sitting behind each of those servers is, importantly, their WebSocket-based connections. And that was something Bob actually had been an early advocate for probably a year or two ago when he was doing some of his stuff with light switches and things. At any rate, their file servers, web servers, and web socket servers. And then the pinkish, yellowish, and orangish blocks are clients of some sort. Web clients, app clients of whatever brand or flavor. The relays tend not to talk to each other. And so there are lots of questions about persistence of data, what happened, disappearing data, and when you don't have a monolithic backend store that does all this kind of forwarding, store and forwarding, what happens? And there's ongoing stuff about that. I don't think there's any. The next couple of pages are a little bit of a running blog of the stuff that and these secret key public keys are just the beauty of all this stuff is they're throwaway keys. They cost nothing to create, but they actually are very, very useful. I became pretty interested in the Ruley, RULEY, which is kind of a groupie thing, but it's early development and there's no documentation to go with it. But I was so intrigued. It's written in Go, and it's just a handful of files, but they're layered files in the sense that they're really built on pretty robust foundations of the underlying technology. Anyways, so I just read through it, the code, in an effort to essentially figure out how he'd put it together, reverse the documentation effort, at least on it. And I was successful in getting the thing up and running. And he very kindly, Fiat Jeff, refreshed, updated a few things. The code is, for anybody who knows Go or doesn't know Go, I would say it's elegant, it's clean, it's pretty amazing stuff. And you can almost see the evolution in the generational nature, literally, of what just happened over the past 6 to 12 months. So this is over the past several days. A lot of time was spent on trying to piece this together. There was the Linode setup that was kind of, it took about a day or so to get the to punch through whatever mysteries are in Postgres that made it workable on my local machine, but not on the Linode servers. And it was all settings in Postgres. As an aside, actually, the virtually all of the stuff that I was able to do on Ubuntu, I was also doing on a Mac, home little, inexpensive $600 box. And it's pretty cool to see, because the Go language is, cross-platform. The dbeaver utility, which is what you can use to view these databases, is cross-platform. Postgres is cross-platform. I am doing this audio over Windows box, but all the other stuff was done over Mac in Ubuntu, and started it on Ubuntu. Spent several days actually through all the Postgres startup on the Mac system just because it was convenient, and then reverted over to Ubuntu later, basically effortlessly. So I thought that was a great surprise to me, to be perfectly honest. Okay, well, one side note: if I don't know if people have seen this utility, Just is the tagline is, it's just a runner. So it's like a simplified version of Make, and essentially what it lets you do is it lets you queue up your utilities to run from a shell, and put it together and make them go off and run. So it's useful for deployment. I have not mastered it, but the most difficult thing was actually installing it, which was kind of a separate issue. But that too runs on all the platforms. For a period of time, you'll see this thing in here, Tailwind CSS, and Bob hit on this, and and he acknowledged that when he was doing the stuff in TypeScript, sometimes it's hard to figure out, is it TypeScript or JavaScript, just by eye, because a lot of it looks the same. But the TypeScript is a compilation step, right? And so two things I've found on that. One is it kind of meddles with debugging, and I still haven't resolved that entirely. And two is it does add an extra step in the development process, right? But the realization is, it seems like that's the direction everybody is kind of heading in for, as a way of making things better, which is to, stick with the underlying foundational stuff, JavaScript, and then add the jimmies on top through compilation. So for instance, for a while I was trying to figure out what a good UI would be for this stuff. It looked at React, poked around with React, and then I got kind of taken by this Svelte, which is another kind of way of doing modularized, componentized UIs, and they've got their own compilation process. And then Tailwind CSS, right, which is it's kind of presented as being a better way of doing CSS, but that's a compilation process as well. So it's everything is kind of, well, I guess it's all software. So but with the Just, they have this concept of recipes, and it's kind of modularized, so you can run the sub recipes, but it turns out it's actually a really good text-based tool for recording. These are all the steps that were necessary to go through to get these servers up and running, which with a little bit of luck, I'm getting closer to actually showing. And so again, these are all the steps you got to go through, and some of this stuff, as we breeze by it, will look familiar and or not. So okay, I'm going to switch over to a different window on Jitsi, because like Bob, I'm on a 4K monitor, and so I couldn't see it all. But I'll maybe what I'll do is the first thing I'll do is I will switch over to the 4K monitor, so you can see the various windows and components here, and then I'll dive in on a window at a time. But are there any questions? Is there sheer confusion? Or basically the headlines are, there's this thing called Noster, notes and other stuff, transmitted by relays. It's based on a fairly simple model of an event record, and then the elements of the components of the record, they have tags, and they have various kinds and various indicators as to what the functionality is supposed to be when you encounter one of these different types or kinds of records. And then the protocol specifies, how to handle them from there. Some of the specification indicates records that can be overwritten and retained. So you've always got the newest version of it, like for instance, a profile. There are other specifications in the protocol for which records can be deleted and how, and that's kind of a key concern. I guess I'll dig a little bit more into some of the protocol things. But if you have questions when I switch over to the windows, shout out. So on the left-hand side, the green stuff and the white stuff, it's just text, but it's essentially dumping out what the various events are that are being added to the database. So let's see if we look here.
Actually, we can't see that because you're still on the total desktop view. You're not sharing the individual window.
Can you see just the highlights of the green text and the white text? Okay. Can you see that, John, a little bit better? It's maybe not
Oh, yeah.
ideal, and it's a memory test to see who can memorize fastest the pub key on line 12. But so we'll scroll through this because this is kind of a good look.
That's what screen capture's for.
Yeah, I suppose you could do that. I don't think there are no bank accounts or anything like that in here. Sorry, that doesn't help. Okay, so I'll move through the database a column at a time, and so the ID, every entry in the system has a unique identifier. I haven't proven it. I haven't counted them all. Theoretically, I'm at this point in time accepting that that unique identifier is created from essentially a mashup of the data in the event with a spin of the public-private keys of the person who created it. This is the public key associated with this event. As you can see, there are a number entered from the same public keys, right? And so that just goes to show that they're being used multiple times. Could somebody spoof a public key that?
Whoever's raising their hand, just unmute yourself. And whoever's got grandchildren in the background, please mute yourself.
Yeah, I think that's my bad. I went to mute
Okay,
Jerry
good.
on the assumption that his was had the grandchildren, but I think I accidentally muted Brian because Brian's also muted.
Yeah. Thanks. Sorry. So we're back. That's good. So this is the pub key, and there are standard utilities that are used. It's kind of a Schnorr encryption scheme. Other people more knowledgeable about this than I could dig into what that means, what the risks are or not. But this is a funky way to display the created at date, but that's what it is. Here are the kinds. There are only a couple here that we're but looking at right now. Some of them are kind of metadata. Some of them are, so for instance, the one is just kind of a plain, simple text, short text note, right? Kind of a Twitter-ish sort of thing. The number here, again, the 30,000, it goes by 30023, is, and this is one of the things that's particularly interesting that to me, is this is kind of a long form, more of a blog posty kind of thing. And so what you can do is, although the notes are geared towards smaller, shorter, snippets, there is, again, and this is kind of the customizability of the server, the back end, the whole environment of clients and servers, the interaction of them. And it's just amazing the libraries that are available, whether from NPM or for essentially translating, transpiling Markdown into HTML for consumption in on different screens. So this is this example here shows a longer blogish kind of document, and with it you have these tags, and so there's a title tag, and you can attach an image to it and a summary, and then you go right into the long form content. I don't know if I hit this, will it show it? It's let's see if I, yeah, it doesn't really. Anyway, so that's a different type, a different kind, I should say. The signature. So after you've created the event, with the text communication or the note, or tends not to have any graphics or blob kinds of data structures, just generally speaking, simple text and markdown. But of course, you can include links and things like that to other hosting services. At any rate, before you publish the document or the note to the event, you sign it. And the way you sign it is the way you sign anything in kind of the cryptographically secure world. Again, other people can debate the merits of whether or not it is, but the signature is the thing which is, essentially provable to indicate that, it was the person who had that public key and the corresponding private key who authored, published this this document. Although, I guess I hadn't really thought about it, but if people were nefarious, I guess they could lift these records in their entirety and kind of move them around a little bit. I have to talk about that. I have to think more about that. Okay, and so that's basically all there is to the database. Now I'm going to jump over to the servers, and we'll see what's cooking over there. Okay, maybe not too exciting, but this. So basically, and I don't know if anybody out there has any suggestions. So you've got 5 or 6 different things happening out on a server, and you're trying to manage them through. You've got 5 or 6 different terminal windows that pop up. Are there what multitasking terminal applications do people use at this point?
I basically just use a standard terminal client and then a screen within it for multiple tabs.
Screen or tmux within, and can have tabs in the terminal window as well. You've got a tab plus in the upper left-hand corner to open a second one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great on the local client, but it doesn't work so well when you're doing it through an SSH connection to a remote server.
Yeah, right. Yes, and that's where either screen or tmux works nicely.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of shut down the I'll shut down these server tasks and start them up one at a time, just so you see, simply what they are. So the first one to kind of go into that's of interest is this Katru Postgres server, and so inside you see the simple Go program, some Markdown stuff just to keep track of things, and a few things like that. And so a simple way to you know, you can either build or you can run Go programs. And so that's interesting. It was running on 3334, but it decided to stop. I'm not sure why that is. Let's see. Yeah, okay, well, that would sort of explain it. But, okay, let's try that again. Bonus points for whoever figures out why that was doing what it was doing. Not a big deal. But so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go behind the scenes, and I'm going to run. Didn't actually show it, but that's okay. So anyways, that's the that is the one server, and I'm going to jump ahead here to I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to jump ahead here, and what I'm going to do. So we're going to leave that's basically a Nostr server with a Postgres backend, and that's the thing that was storing things into the database that we had been looking at a few minutes ago. Okay, but and so I've just added some more records, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump in to another. I'm going to do another Windows switch. Pushing my luck with the demo gods here. Yeah, that wasn't it. Well, okay. Well, that one's up. I'll jump in and we'll see how that. Okay. You know what I might do? I'll just give you a glimpse at the code. So, for instance, the moderation code. And there are a huge number of options here on how they manage. If you can see there, the 9,000 on the left, 9,001, 9,002. It's, you know, you can read through it. 9,000 is for adding, so it's a moderation activity to add users. 9,001 is to remove users, and 9,002 the metadata, which is like the group name and things like that. So only people who have those permissions to carry and whoever the overall master of this thing is allowed to assign and set up the permissions and apply the permissions. So that's kind of what that is. That's the and that's, you know, pre alpha at this point in time. Let me just do. I want to do one last thing in the minutes, the waning minutes that pass, to see if I can get. Let's see. That's what I was kind of worried about. I'm going to start closing things down. Let's see. Ah, there it is. Okay, it is running. Okay, let's see. It's already running. Oh, yeah, okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna do one last final context switch here. Single window, Firefox. Okay, with a bit of luck. So what I'm going to pull up, and then we'll, say goodnight, is the gateway that will take a Nostr event and present it, translate it, to, take that stuff you saw in the database format and present it basically in HTML format. It's trying to share my screen, but oh. You know what? Okay. Well, that's a little bit more promising. Let's see if we can do this real quick. So the gateway should be running. I'm not sure what that one is. Screen. It's not that one. It's tricky to find which is the hidden screen. It's not that one. There we go. Let's see. Okay. Moment of truth. Okay, that's a good note to end on. It actually worked. So for anybody who stayed up late, so basically what this did is it plugged into 172.104.25.73, which is the server out there in Linode, and it's running on port 2999. It's running this Nostr gateway, and it picked off an event 1QQ. So there are two ways that they represent these huge hexadecimal values, and they have application technique for essentially adding in a prefix that gives it some kind of human identifier, an event or a public key or a private key or so forth and so on. Anyways, what this thing did in just that split second, which is pretty cool, is it went into the Postgres database. It figured out what that n event thing really meant in its hexadecimal value. It plucked it from the Postgres database, jammed it into this Noster gateway, which then essentially repackaged it, unbundled it, unzipped it, so to speak, and repackaged it from Markdown into